Hi everyone, good morning from Hope Inc. Academy. This morning here in Los Angeles, hope you guys are all doing well around the world. I am having the amazing Dr. Alex Volinsky on, and we're gonna get him in here.
12 rope worms, and worms are, yay, I think I hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All
Woo!
right, great.
Awesome, cool. I was just getting to your introduction, and you are a PhD, and in 2012 you discovered rope worms as a result of water only fasting and conducting its initial DNA studies. Tell us a little bit more about that so I make sure I get that accurately.
Well, I stopped eating for 17 days, and on the fifth day of fasting, I had a big snot that came out of me, and I didn't know what it was. I initially thought it was a parasite of some sort, and I brought it to doctors and different labs for testing. So that's how I discovered the rope worms. Then I learned that there is actually a book written by Nikolai Gubarev in Russia who claims that those are parasites. And then I got connected to the community of parents of autistic children, and they had a database of the different images that come out of what comes out of the children when they're being put on different cleanses. So that's how I discovered rope worms.
Interesting. So yes, in our clinics and schools, we have ourselves definitely seen these worms be, out of children on the spectrum, not only of autism, but children with Down syndrome and most developmental issues, even children with diagnosable ADHD or speech and language issues. And we have definitely seen this in our clinics and schools. And tell us a little bit more about your research project then now that you've discovered this yourself.
Well, I brought the samples to the Moffitt Cancer Research Center, and actually what happened is I approached Gubarev, and we wrote a paper and tried to submit it to the scientific journal, the International Journal for Parasitology. But the paper was rejected because the editor said that there's no proof that this is in fact a parasite. So I asked the editor what would be considered the proof or what needs to be done, and he said that you need to conduct DNA studies and electron microscopy. So both has been done, but the results are inconclusive. So if anybody asks me what rope worms are, I don't really know what it is. They are formed of cells, and those are cells clearly seen in the microscope, and we've done different tests to look at the structure of that. There are definitely cells, but at this point, I'd like to really understand what they are by doing the full genome sequencing of those of the DNA extracted from the cells of the ropeworms.
So are you starting to do those studies on the full DNA, the genomes? Where are you at?
Yeah. See, my major is material science and mechanical engineering. I'm not an expert in this field. I have a personal interest in this because so many people are affected by it, and there's definitely a therapeutic effect when they leave the body. And at this point, I'm not really sure if this is normal, if this is something that our body produces, or it's a foreign matter and it's a parasite.
And so you've seen this across the spectrum with, what we generally consider typical individuals like ourselves, as well as the other end of the spectrum of the disabled population. You've seen it in both?
Correct. I've seen this come out, for example, people say that this is a result of violent procedures that people do and the enemas that Gubarev patented. My daughter passed this ropeworm a couple of times without doing anything. So I don't know if it is normal or if it's an infection or if it's the mechanism for the body to deal with the infection, which is why I think that people with a proper background should be studying this. And not just it's an objective material matter that can be studied using modern scientific methods.
Is there a pre and post implication of behavioral or intellectual, or, most people are concerned with that as I do maybe a particular elimination diet, as in your case you were fasting, or in The special needs population, they do gluten-free, casein-free, even in Lyme disease and particular celiac issues. We're seeing a lot of change amongst all of us in the last few decades where we're experimenting with our diet. And so have you seen any behavioral or intellectual correlations to after a post-elimination of this particular, what you're hypothesizing is a worm, essentially?
Right. I'm not a practitioner, so I can only speak about my personal experience. During the 5th day of fasting, I was so depressed I didn't want to live. Then I went to the bathroom and this thing came out of me, and it was like I was born again. So
wow.
there's definitely a huge benefit, and there's a Facebook group with over 6,000 people there, and they're doing different procedures to eliminate them, and once they do, they feel much better. There's definitely some sort of a correlation between this ropeworms and the psyche. Definitely has to do with the diet or lack thereof when you're fasting. So, but at this point, I can't really say much about the ropeworms because there needs to be more studies done at this point.
What's the name of that group? I'm going to put that in the comments for our listeners.
The Facebook group is called Ropeworm.
Okay, pretty straightforward, ropeworm. Okay. And so Lawrence here is talking about something with ropeworms could be a byproduct of GMOs or mucus buildup can cause them. Is that anecdotal research, you think, or is there some implications early on that that's what's happening?
I'm not really sure. According to Gubarev, this ropeworms are much older than the humans, and I don't know where he gets this information. He believes that everybody has this, but if you look at it, basically what it is, it's a big snot that could be, a couple of feet long. It could be different color. It has this kind of snotty, mucousy structure. And if you look under the microscope, after you clean the sample, you can clearly see the cells. So, this is a material object that can be studied using the scientific methods.
And has there been, and remind me again the doctor's name, how to spell that. I'm going to also put that in the comments. Dr. First name and last name?
Dr. Gubarev, but when you say doctor, it means that he has a PhD. It doesn't mean that he's a medical doctor. So
we understand.
With my case.
How do you spell his name?
We're not practitioners. We're not medical doctors, although my wife is a medical doctor. She has a PhD in endocrinology. But I don't have the proper credentials to talk about the subject. I thought that we're going to be talking about vaccines today.
We're going to get there. We'll get there. But tell me that doctor's first and last name for our listeners just so they can go. And we understand the disclaimer.
Right. His name is Nikolai Gubarev.
Spell Nikolai. I'm a horrible speller. Nicoli? Nich?
Nikolay.
Ah, okay.
Gubarev.
Sorry, say that again. G what?
Gubarev.
Okay. And Nikolai was Nikolay?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So I met him at a chronic disease research conference in Seattle, which was organized, and there were many practitioners there, and that's where we met for the first time. He actually wrote a book in Russian, which is called Helminth, Known and Unknown. And at some point we were going to edit that book, but he claims that it's a parasite. And at this point, there's no enough evidence to say that this is definitely a parasite.
What's the difference between a parasite and a worm and cells?
Well, the cells could be human cells. In fact, like cancer is produced by the human body, right? So it's not, the parasite is something that does not belong in the body. It's not produced by the body, and but at the same time, it's not a standalone. It is a standalone organism, but it needs a host to survive. So that's a parasite is a more complicated thing, but this is very primitive. It looks like mucus, but you cannot cut it with a knife. It's kind of stringy and nasty. It smells like dead fish, basically. When it leaves the body, you feel great. You feel like you're born again. And again, when people argue that this is a result of violent procedures and cleansing procedures, with which Gubarev patented in Russia, he patented three kinds of enemas: eucalyptus broth, baking soda, and milk with salt. That's what he did in Russia. But you know, there are people that do nothing, and they just these things come out, so they objectively exist. The medical world basically is in the denial right now. They're saying this does not exist. This is all a result of your violent procedures. That is not the case.
Yeah, let's transition into that in the medical community. So a little bit about, you know, we're talking about foreign substances or cells, if you will, or violent procedures and whatnot. And so let's transition into the vaccines and share a little bit with us on how you got into just researching the vaccines and what's going on with current medical community in that arena for many of us looking at that.
Right. Again, not being a healthcare provider or professional, I can only speak about my personal experience and the experience of my family. So I personally received a DTP vaccine at about 1 year old, and then I almost died from that vaccine. After that, I developed allergies. I had rashes and food allergies and all sorts of issues, chronic tonsillitis and other things. So after that one DTP vaccine, now I grew up in the Soviet Union, so my parents talked to the doctors, and I was exempt from further vaccines.
What year was this? Because you look like you're. What year was this? Sorry to interrupt you. What year was this?
I was born in 1973, so this was about 1974. Okay. And then both on the sides of my family and my wife's family, my nephews, they became autistic as a result of the vaccine, and a similar thing happened to my wife's nephew. So I was holding this child myself, and he had eye contact. We were playing, and after the vaccine, he was gone. And you know, this is unfortunate. It's interesting how the medical field compares everything. They do a double-blind controlled placebo studies, and they call it
not
medical
when it comes
science.
to vaccine.
Now, when it comes to vaccines, you know, you're injecting 30 different things which are potent, because when my daughter received an MMR vaccine at the age of 6 months, she had fever for 2 days. So if there was nothing in that vaccine, how come she was developing the fever? And also the preservatives in the vaccines, the mercury salts and monosodium glutamate and whatever else they put in there.
Formaldehyde, aluminum, arsenic, cadmium, the list goes on and on. Mm-hmm.
My latest experience, well, so when I was a teenager, I had a head trauma. I have a scar right here, and I received a tetanus shot in the arm, and the arm swelled up, and I was sick from that tetanus shot. So again, if somebody's exposed to a virus, a bacteria, or mold, then there are certain ways that they come to your body. They're not being injected 30 different strains of different things. They're not injected into your body. You can get scratched and you can go work in your backyard and you can get something going to your bloodstream, but not, you know, 30 different things. So then the other thing is the immunity, right? Again, I'm not an expert in the field, but some of the vaccines you have to repeat. And there's also some evidence, I believe, that shows that people that receive the vaccines, they're actually contagious. So having said all that, I want to share my personal experience with homeopathic no-see-ums, which I believe are ultimate cure and a good alternative to the vaccines. So my father-in-law is an infectious disease doctor who practices homotoxicology in Italy. And I learned the technique from him by accident, because when our daughter was 4 years old in Italy, she was bitten by mosquitoes, and she developed an allergic reaction to those mosquitoes. So then I saw what he did with the mosquitoes. He diluted the water that mosquito was in 3 times, and he shook it, and he gave this water to my daughter when she was 4 years old. In 2 days, her skin became clear.
What's the
And I
name of
got
this protocol again? I want to write that in the comments, please.
Well, what it is called NOSODE, NOSODE. It's not really a protocol, but it's a way to prepare a homeopathic remedy, and the disease itself becomes the cure. So in this case, the mosquito, which was causing allergic reaction in my daughter, was placed in water, and it was the water was diluted 3 times with the ratio of 10, so it would be called 3x dilution or 3D dilution. I later tried it with a 2-year-old, and she was cured in a matter of hours. I have a lot of anecdotes with respect to that. Then I asked my father-in-law, I said, well, I have chronic tonsillitis. What about the tonsil stones? What if I a nosode from the tonsil stones? He said, no, you can't, it's not going to work. Well, I didn't listen to him. I made nosodes from the tonsil stones, and I cured chronic tonsillitis. The other thing I cured was simplex herpes virus, and I had outbreaks in my cheek nerve here, and that was completely cured. The recent episode, I had MRSA infection in my left foot, which was caused by the no-see-um bite in Florida. And again, I'm not a doctor. I don't need the diagnostics, but I really know that this works.
Okay, so I'm gonna interject really quick, Alex, because you are a doctor. So this is something I do want to disclose. You're not a medical doctor, but you are a PhD doctor. So I know that's been coming up a lot during this interview, and so I want to just address that for a minute before you continue on. So most people know I have 2 master's degrees. I did 2 doctorates, a PhD and 1 in education, and I got all the way to the publication phase. And in my life, things started to happen. My internet systems were getting hacked. I had attempted murders on my life. I started getting accused of being mentally ill, paranoid, delusional, schizophrenia. So this part of what you're talking about for our listeners is extremely important, because PhDs are doctors, and you're trained, like myself, I'm trained to look at independent and dependent variables and measure these particular, what we call single case studies, commonly referred to as anecdotal, and looking at ethics and the quality assurance of those particular observational and sometimes qualitative or quantitative analysis of what we're looking at. So I just wanted to validate your education level and that you are a doctor, you're a PhD. You said you're married to an MD, so I'm sure you've got a lot of, collaboration between some highly educated individuals, as well as your father-in-law in Italy. And so as you continue on in the past, people that have been with us watching throughout this, or they're just coming on, in our community, for myself as a mother of a severely vaccine injured child, I've been a clinician for almost 20 years and an educator. I've owned clinics and schools. I've worked with world-renowned doctors. I've been to 22 countries, and I've worked with hundreds of MDs, PhDs, practitioners, clinicians, you name it. It's important that everybody watching knows that what we are saying is going on, and pre and post or cures or helpful progression or whatever we're discussing, or observations of crazy things we're seeing like ropeworms, or children being cured after certain homeopathic or interventions from food and diet. So I just wanted to address that particular emotional side or educational piece as you continue sharing on this wonderful information that you have, and validate you and explain that. So
my credentials are, I have a PhD in material science and engineering from the University of South Florida, and I teach and do research at I have a PhD from the University of Minnesota. I work at the University of South Florida as an associate professor. So I teach courses in material science and engineering and mechanics of materials and material selection and mechanical design. So it's all engineering. This is my personal I would say interest, but I understand what the scientific method is. I understand what peer review literature
Right.
is. So I understand
You
the difference
understand what
between.
independent review board is and how you early
Correct.
on mentioned the medical community rejecting things or not looking at themselves using the scientific method.
Correct. So personally, being kind of an outsider between the drug or the Western medicine and the placebo effect, I'll take the placebo. That's what they're comparing everything with. I'll take the placebo every day of the week. And maybe in the future, there will be some merge between the personalized medicine, like traditional Chinese medicine or homeopathy, for example. And, it's really unfortunate to see how this medical field has developed since the discovery of antibiotics, because the scientists thought that they're better than God, they can treat everything. So you're using mold to treat the bacteria. Well, that's great. Does the bacteria really cause the disease, or is this an imbalance of bacteria? Is pasteurization good for you or not? Many people have pathogenic bacteria, they never get sick. So I look at this holistically, and as long as your system is in balance, homeostasis it's called, and your microbiome is in check, then you never get sick. It's only when one of those little guys start to overgrow, that's when the problems become. So going back to vaccines, the nosode, which according to the science, after the third or fourth dilution, there's nothing in that water. Could be water, alcohol, could be sugar. There's nothing there. But all of a sudden, I'm going to the medical doctor who wants to cut my leg off because I have infection in my foot. And he tells me that we're going to amputate your leg in case the MRSA is going to spread into the joint. And they call CDC on me. And after they did the sensitivity studies, they said, oh, we're sorry. The antibiotic we prescribed, the doxycycline, it's the wrong antibiotic. You should be taking Bactrim. I said, you know what? I'm not going to take doxycycline, and I'm not going to take Bactrim. And the reason MRSA exists is because you're prescribing antibiotics left and right without knowing what you're treating, because you're basing it on the symptom. You're not treating the cause of the disease. You're treating the symptom. And I don't really know if there is an approach in the Western medicine to treat chronic conditions. And so most of the doctors, they prescribe medication, which is based on the double-blind. What's that?
I think I could share a little bit about the experience as a clinician with, thousands of case studies here in California when looking at Western medicine and helping the vaccine injured, or even the parents that don't believe necessarily vaccines cause their children's autism, and they stick to the I don't know what happened. But what we have observed when it comes to Western medication is still using a pharmacological approach. And so if people are familiar with Dr. Michael Goldberg, he has the book, The Myth of Autism, and he talks about it being a whole spectrum of ADHD, bipolar, speech and language, learning disabilities, to mild to moderate to severe autism, it being a whole spectrum. And he calls it neuroimmune deficiency syndrome. These doctors, a lot of these MDs, and I use Dr. Michael Goldberg a lot. He was my son's doctor, as well as quite a few hundreds of patients that we had seen in our clinics and our schools. And their approach for Western medicine is still pharmacological. So antiviral, antifungal, SSRIs like Paxil and Lexapro and Prozac, the use of ADHD medication, so stimulants such as Adderall and Vyvanse, 10X, which used to be off-label. So 10X is also known as guanfacine. So it's a heart medication that they used to use off-label. They later discovered that it was considered on-label now after studying it for symptomology of ADHD. And so when it comes to treating children and looking at vaccine injury from the doctors that won't put their necks out there and they're fearful, and they won't outright say in public or in their books or their research publications that there's a correlation to vaccines, but behind closed doors to us parents, they will say it. And there's Dr. Rosignol, who's an MD down here in California, and there's Dr. Jerry Cartzenell, a medical doctor who wrote a book with Jenny McCarthy. And so there's Dr. Sears. You've got all here in the metropolitan area of Los Angeles, these doctors, but when it comes to treating them, they still are adhering to a lot of Western pharmacological approaches. Chelation, they stay away from. Some of the experimental things like HBOT. Homeopathy, a lot of them will still say is a fallacy. It's not, useful. So just for some of the listeners, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, because I know when you travel around the United States, you'll find different pockets of medical doctors treating children with vaccine injury or, spectrum disorders of that nature. I'm not sure what you're familiar with on your side of the country.
Well, the medical doctors, they have their license that they can easily lose if they pursue that route. So they have to stick with whatever. But if you think who are administering those vaccines, these are pediatricians that are administering those vaccines. Our pediatrician wanted us to see the infectious disease doctor to scare us about all the vaccines. So we did all of the vaccines. I made sure that at birth the vaccine was mercury free. It was more expensive. The shelf life of the vaccine was 3 days versus, a month. This is why they put preservatives into the vaccine, to have it last longer. And after 6 months, because of the projects I had in Europe and Asia, we were traveling. So by the time we came back, our daughter was ready to go to school, and she needed to get like 30 shots. So at that point, I realized this is insane to do those 30 shots. And I went to the CDC and I wrote the letter, whatever is required by law in Florida, and which is good till the end of high school. So she does not need to be vaccinated. Again, on both sides of the family, there are cases in Russia where the kids in our family were damaged by the vaccine. And you cannot tell to your child that all of a sudden your child develops the symptoms and has developmental problems. It's almost like an instantaneous shutdown. So again, I'm not being an expert, but people believe that, first of all, the pill, the drug can cure the disease. And in most cases, it's the masking of the symptom. In case of the vaccine, maybe it worked in the beginning. I haven't really studied the history, but now injecting 30 different things at one shot, the immune system has to respond to that. Our daughter was breastfed till the age of 3.5. She would never get sick. She only started to get sick after she started to go to kindergarten and school and got off the breast milk. So again, people that study this, immunologists, those are the ones who should be looking at that. And then,
well, I don't think you necessarily have to be an expert to realize that we've had a shift in the last, you could do a longitudinal study of the last 100 years or the last 50 years or the last 20 years to see a progressional change of 30 shots. I've had probably 5 shots. I'm 41 and I've had 5. I had a severe reaction to the vaccination. My 19-year-old had a severe reaction to the vaccination. My 18-year-old, a severe deathly one, where now he's nonverbal and seizure disorders. My older 2 were not vaccinated at all. You look at your mother and our grandparents, and when you historically look at vaccinations, you don't necessarily have to be an expert to realize that something has changed. And when you do the research and look at how disease processes change, there's sanitation, there's plumbing, the washing of the hands, the food distribution, all those different changes that we've had. So anecdotally or qualitative and quantitatively, you can't even say it's the vaccinations that have eradicated this, but you don't have to be an expert to realize going from different generations of one shot traditionally of polio to you and I in the 70s. I was born in the 70s, where it was anywhere between 3 to maybe 5 shots to now 30 shots in an underdeveloped immune system. of a developing brain and gut correlation. And I'm not sure medically if you want to talk a little bit about some other discoveries that you've made some comments on here, if you could see them, or asking about the tonsil treatment and some other aspects that are your specialties. So I'd like for you to share that too.
So, as far as the chronic tonsillitis, I was born and raised in Moscow, Russia, and it's cold, and every winter I would get sore throat. And at some point they wanted to surgically remove the tonsils. And I'm lucky that this did not happen, because I was sick. You're not supposed to be sick for 6 months for them to surgically remove the tonsils. So after this first experience with the mosquito in Italy, I started to experiment by making no-see-ums, homeopathic remedy from the tonsil stones. And as a result of that, nasty stuff started to come out of my throat. And I haven't had tonsillitis since then. It took maybe about a year. I still get tonsil stones, but my tonsils never get inflamed. The other procedure that I do, because I live in Clearwater and it's close to the ocean, or I do it in the shower, I stick my finger inside and then massage the back of the tonsil. First, it causes gagging if you do it first couple of times, but after that you get used to it. You basically clean the back of your tonsil with your finger, make sure the finger is clean. And I haven't been having any problems. I do have a channel on YouTube where I show how to do the tonsil cleansing. I also have a video
on
your
YouTube show?
as well. What happened, speaking about conspiracy theories and whatnot, I did have a channel with thousands of subscribers, and one day it was gone. Like Google just closed it out. So I opened another channel. The name of the channel is Baba Marcus. It's not my real name. It's Bubamarkus, and I do have an instructional video.
Slow down a little bit. B-U-B.
If you go to YouTube and you just put in Ropeworm First Conference, that would be the video of presentation that I made. And I do have a channel. I do have a video on how to make no-see-ums. I don't talk in the video what you use to start with, but I've used the scrapes from the rashes. I used tonsil stones. I used earwax. I used eyelashes because I had itchy eyes. Again, I am not a medical doctor. I don't need the diagnostics, but the treatment is free. So what do you have to lose? Nothing. I know that in India it's very popular, but I strongly believe in no-see-ums. Not because